A federal grand jury reportedly approving the first charges in the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian election interference. I'm Molly Line in for Julie Banderas. You're watching the Fox Report. The sealed indictment from Mueller setting off widespread speculation on who could be targeted and what the charges might be. Right now, we just don't know. The Wall Street Journal is reporting authorities could arrest at least one person as early as Monday. These new developments sparking renewed criticism from Republicans.
There are many of us that have been saying for months that Mr. Mueller has a conflict of interest. And I think that he's tied right back to the original Uranium One scandal from 2010. He is the common link, the common thread all the way through this. And one needs to know, and we really don't know, what role did that Fusion GPS dossier, which allegedly is just filled with fraud and misstatements, how much was that relied upon by the FBI to initiate the investigation for which they now have an indictment, which coincidentally seems to be diverting attention from this massive Fusion GPS scandal, which really broke big time this week.
Now a quick look back at just how we got here. The Justice Department appointed Mueller on May 17th after the president fired FBI Director James Comey. A month later, we learned he was investigating President Trump for obstruction of justice. A week after that, it emerged that the investigation had turned to the president's finances. On July 26th, the FBI raided the home of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. On August 5th, Mueller impaneled a grand jury, and that brings us up to yesterday, when the first charges were reportedly filed. We have Fox team coverage on this. Kristen Fisher is live at the White House, but we begin with Garrett Tenney in Washington. Garrett, while we don't know exactly who is being charged, we do know some of the individuals who have been targets of this investigation, right?
Absolutely, Molly. You got to remember, when Special Counsel Robert Mueller was appointed, he was given very broad powers to look into anything that comes up in the course of his investigation, even if it's not directly related to Russia's election meddling. And over the last 6 months, that investigation has grown to include the finances of President Trump and his associates, as well as their contacts with Russians and other foreign agents. One of the top targets of those efforts has been former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, who is being investigated for alleged money laundering and tax issues, according to the Wall Street Journal. Last night, though, Manafort's attorney told Fox News neither he nor anyone on his legal team had been informed of an indictment, which would typically happen if any charges had been filed against their client. Another person of interest in the investigation has been former campaign advisor Carter Page. This afternoon, he suggested his legal team also had not been contacted about any charges and added in a statement to Fox News, "In terms of charges, I can't even imagine what might even be considered now that the false evidence from the politically motivated big money finance dodgy dossier that started this extrajudicial disaster has instead been so thoroughly exposed as a complete sham." There's also former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who's being investigated over allegations that he attempted to work with Russian hackers during the election to get copies of Hillary Clinton's emails. His attorneys have not responded to our multiple requests for comment. Molly?
All right. Do we have any idea at all what kind of charges these could be?
Well, at this point, it really could be just about anything, especially given the wide scope of Robert Mueller's investigation. And that's why at this point, several former Justice Department officials have said there's no way to guess what they are or what this indictment means to the investigation overall.
I think it could be any number of things. And if it's a one-off kind of, I mean, there could be a false statement that someone made to the FBI. It could be obstruction of justice, that someone destroyed documents. I mean, those things, could have an effect in terms of telling other witnesses that are out there, you better cooperate or else we'll go after you.
Again, though, we will likely have at least some of these questions answered when the charges are formally introduced and arrests are made, and those could happen as soon as Monday. Molly?
Yeah, it could potentially be a very huge week in Washington.
Absolutely.
Garrett Tenney there in Washington for us tonight. For more on all of this, let's bring in Ted Williams, criminal defense attorney, former homicide detective, and a Fox News contributor. Thanks for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
You are familiar with this courthouse, familiar with the judges there. Bring us a little insight into what's next as we look ahead to Monday.
Well, you're right. I'm very familiar with the courthouse. As a matter of fact, I was in that courthouse just yesterday at the portrait hanging of a Judge Emmett Sullivan. I can tell you that once an indictment is handed down, the viewers need to understand everything that goes on in the grand jury is secret. I'm somewhat disappointed that it has now come out that a sealed indictment has come out. But nevertheless, what normally happens now is that there are charges. The FBI and local police are going to do one of two things. At some stage, they're going to contact the lawyers involved with the person or the target's charge, and they're going to ask them to bring them in, or they're going to do what is known as a perp walk. And that is where somebody leaks the fact that somebody has been charged, and all of the cameras are there to see them walk out in handcuffs.
You know, as you talk about if they've gotten a heads up or not, we have heard word from some folks that have been in the circle of these investigations, Carter Page from the Manafort team, that they don't think that they haven't had any word that they are part of this indictment. And we haven't heard from Michael Flynn's team. But do you have any insight into who could be named in this indictment?
Well, I think they're all sweating. Just because they have not been contacted as of now, it does not mean that they're off the hook. What is happening right now, Mueller's team needs some individuals to squeeze. And so they're looking for people like, for instance, Mike Flynn's son, who very well could be on the radar screen. Mike Flynn could be on the radar screen. Paul Manafort. We really don't know at this stage, but we do know that they're trying to find somebody who is vulnerable, they can squeeze. And when I say squeeze, that is that will cooperate in the investigation and give out information so that the investigation can continue successfully.
Given the breadth of power involved, that this investigation could go quite broadly, not just into Russian meddling, but perhaps into business dealings, into tax evasion, and all sorts of things, really. You mentioned going after potentially what could be seen as the small fish to kind of lean on them for more information. So if that's true, does this signal the beginning? Does it signal the middle? Where are we as this process moves forward?
I think it signals more of a beginning of the actual investigative process. Being and having been a federal agent myself, I have participated in the grand jury process also, and I can tell you one of the things we want are individuals who can give us information where we can spread out and move out after other individuals. So we don't know where this is going, but we know one thing, it is certainly, I think, at the beginning stages.
All right, we will see. Monday will be a big news day for certain, could potentially be, and we will see if the days after that are just as newsworthy. Ted, thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
The Washington Free Beacon, a conservative publication, now saying that it initially paid for the research done by Fusion GPS on Republican candidates in the 2016 campaign. However, it says it had nothing to do with the former British spy who compiled that now infamous Trump dossier that was funded by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. The Wall Street Journal's Kimberly Strassel saying that these denials coming to light are just the beginning.
I think what we should be watching for is the House Intelligence Committee is in discussions and negotiations at the moment with Fusion GPS to get a hold of the rest of Fusion's bank records. And look, I think it's notable that Fusion didn't reveal the names of its clients until this week. It's been under immense pressure to do so for almost a year, and it did so because it was trying to curry favor with those investigators and keep those bank records secret.
All right, for more on this, we go to Kristen Fisher. She is at the White House. Kristen, what is the White House saying about all these recent revelations?
Well, Molly, the White House is using this to flip the script on Democrats. They say this shows that if anyone was colluding with the Russians, that it was the Clinton campaign and not the Trump campaign. And they are, of course, making this argument right at the exact same time that the Russia probe is entering this new critical phase.
Congress has spent a great deal of time on this, a better part of a year. All of your news organizations have actually spent probably a lot of money on this as well, which we would consider probably a pretty big waste. I think that our position hasn't changed since day one, and I think we are seeing now that if there was any collusion with Russia, it was between the DNC and the Clintons, and certainly not our campaign.
So far, no statement from the Clinton campaign, but Democrats argue they've done nothing wrong, that this is nothing more than your standard opposition research that any kind of campaign would collect or try to put out during the course of a very heated presidential race, Molly.
All right, well, Saturdays, typically very active days for President Trump on Twitter. Bring us up to speed on what he's been tweeting about today.
Yeah, this Saturday was no exception. President Trump was kind of all over the map. He was tweeting about former President Jimmy Carter, the opioid epidemic, the JFK files, First Responders Day. He also talked about some of the positive economic numbers that he believes aren't getting enough attention. He says, quote, very little reporting about the great GDP numbers announced yesterday. 3% despite the big hurricane hits, best consecutive quarters in years. And I have to point out, though, that those numbers were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times today. One more thing before I go, Molly, and this is President Trump just kind of acknowledging that one of his tweets may be beneath his office. He tweeted this just moments ago. He says, quote, while not at all presidential, I must point out that the sloppy Michael Moore show on Broadway was a total bomb and was forced to close. Sad. That got quite a chuckle from everyone here at the White House tonight, Molly. At least he acknowledged it, right?
Well, I will acknowledge that you cover an enormous amount of ground there at the White House every day. Spectacular job. Thank you for that report, Kristen. We appreciate it.
I tried. Thanks, Molly.
All right. Meanwhile, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly is sitting down with Laura Ingraham for the premiere of The Ingraham Angle. He will more than likely touch on the Russia investigation and that fiery war of words between him and Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. You can catch that exclusive interview this Monday night on Fox News Channel. Of course, check your local listings. Right now, a suspect is behind bars for starting a raging fire in California that caused millions in damage, and investigators say he used that fire to commit even more crimes. Plus, once classified files on JFK's assassination are released in a huge document dump, but many more records remain under wraps, why that could soon change. And experts explain why it is just so crucial that all of these documents are made public.
Everything is politicized. Look, what's going to matter is whether we get all this stuff. Some of the key documents are still out there.
Wildfire that scorched hundreds of acres of land. 54-year-old Marlon Coy is accused of starting the Bear Creek fire in Santa Cruz and then looting the homes of people who evacuated. 13 firefighters were hurt battling the fire, which destroyed 2 homes, 5 RVs, 17 cars. More than $7 million worth of damage was done. Still, officials say the outcome could have been even worse.
Rarely have I seen a more reckless actions than those committed by this depraved man. If not for the heroic efforts by first responders, he could easily be facing murder charges today.
Coy remains in jail on $800,000 bail. He will make his first court appearance next week. President Trump vowing on Twitter to release all of the remaining records on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The National Archives released about 3,000 classified records on Thursday, but roughly 1,000 were withheld over concern by some federal agencies about sensitive information in those files. Larry Sabato, director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, says the information could shed some light on the issues that remain a mystery decades after JFK's death.
There are some hints that Oswald may have told people or may have had some help, particularly on that trip to Mexico City. I've been convinced for a long time that in the 6 days he was there, he did a lot. It wasn't just going to the Soviet and Cuban embassies. That accounts for several hours of 6 days.
It's fascinating to see the history unfolding here. Will Carr joining me from Los Angeles with more. Will, what are we learning? What sort of nuggets are in these documents that have been released?
Well, Molly, there's still a lot of unanswered questions out there, but the documents released Thursday are still filled with espionage, Cold War intrigue, and really give us a historic look at the world climate at the time of JFK's assassination. Take a 1964 FBI memo, for example, detailing discussions to assassinate Fidel Castro for around $100,000. Dealing more directly with the assassination, a CIA memo outlined a call that was intercepted from Lee Harvey Oswald to the Russian embassy in Mexico while Oswald was in Mexico City. Still a lot of questions about his time there leading up to the assassination. There's still a number of documents that have not been released to the public. And take a listen to Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
I've talked with the FBI. We've talked with our staff here. I think the president is right to say, let's get this material out. They're moving today very quickly. Some documents have already been produced today, and they'll be moved faster. And there will not be, I believe, any significant redactions.
Even with those documents, in the end, historians don't think we'll find any truths that don't coincide with the story we know right now.
Yeah, all the same, when can we expect those remaining documents to be released?
Well, the intelligence agencies have 6 months to review the documents again that haven't been released. Over that time, they'll have to prove to President Trump why those documents should remain secret or be redacted. But it seems like that will only happen if they involve a living person's name or any information about that person. Molly.
All right, Will Carr, thank you for the latest on all of that. A deadly blast in a city already reeling from a previous attack that killed hundreds. What happened this time around, and who could be behind it? And the political turmoil escalating with a new round of back and forth as Catalonia pushes for independence from Spain. At least 23 people killed and dozens more wounded after a suicide truck bombing outside of a popular hotel in the capital of Somalia. Security forces responding to the scene, chasing down attackers as gunfire rang out. The Al-Shabaab terror group has claimed responsibility. That blast comes just 2 weeks after the country's worst ever terror attack, a truck bombing on a busy street that killed 350 people. The political turmoil in Spain is escalating after lawmakers in Catalonia declared independence. Their victory turning out to be short-lived as the Spanish government quickly moved to seize control of the region. Some of the people who live there hoping that cooler heads will prevail.
Let's see. I think they have to speak it's to one another and try to make an agreement and try to listen our beliefs, our arguments. So it will be difficult, I think. There's still a lot of work to do.
All right, for more on this, we go to Kitty Logan in London.
Hi, Molly. The political crisis in Spain is deepening. The Spanish government has now removed power from the Catalonian region in response to a declaration of independence yesterday. It has dismissed Catalonian President Carles Puigdemont from his position, but he shows no sign of backing down. Today, he's been speaking to supporters, calling for a peaceful opposition to the Spanish government. The Spanish Prime Minister dissolved the Catalonian Parliament yesterday, following a vote by that Parliament to formally declare independence. The Spanish government says this is not a legal process. The independence vote sparked jubilation from pro-independence supporters outside the Catalan Parliament. There are real doubts, though, over whether this will ever become reality. European governments have refused to recognise an independent Catalonia. But separatists argue a referendum held on October 1st legitimises Catalonia's independence. This is a divisive issue for Spain, and thousands of supporters of a unified country also took to the streets yesterday, many saying they would continue to protest until the crisis is resolved. The Spanish government has called for fresh regional elections this coming December, but meanwhile the situation in Catalonia remains extremely tense and no one knows what may come next. Molly?
It is very precarious. President Trump calling this a modern-day Watergate, while Democrats call it a distraction. Coming up, we break down the details of the 2010 Uranium One deal. Plus, the report that could rock Washington. Robert Mueller said to be filing his first charges in the Russia investigation. Expert analysis on how the White House will handle it.
This is about as high-profile an investigation as probably either of us can remember. From a political standpoint, this is rather extraordinary. If a charge were brought, it's going to have been stress tested at a minimum.
I'm Molly Line in for Julie Banderas, and this is the Fox Report. It is the bottom of the hour. If you are just joining us, Special Counsel Robert Mueller reportedly filing the first charges in the investigation into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The Wall Street Journal reporting that authorities could arrest at least one person as early as Monday. The Washington Free Beacon, a conservative publication, now saying it initially paid for the opposition research done by Fusion GPS on Republican candidates in the 2016 campaign. However, it says it had nothing to do with that now infamous Trump dossier. And two House committees on Capitol Hill now saying they'll investigate the Obama administration's approval of the Uranium One deal from 2010. It allowed the Russian company to take control of uranium mines in Utah and Wyoming. Here's Texas Congressman Blake Farenthold.
Mrs. Clinton was one of 9 on the group that approved it. But as you know, being at the table and being Secretary of the State, your opinion is going to carry a whole lot of weight in that room. Again, it just doesn't smell right. The evidence could potentially be there. I think it needs to be fully investigated, and that's why our committees in Congress are going to take a look at it. Quite frankly, I think there needs to be a special counsel on this.
For more on this story, we go to Caroline Shively in Washington.
Molly, this week President Trump called the Uranium One deal a modern-day Watergate. Here's the backstory. Uranium One is a Canadian company but has operations that have access to 20% of the uranium production capacity in the U.S. In 2010, the Obama administration allowed the sale of the company to Russia's Atomic Energy Agency. As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton was one of 9 members on the Committee on Foreign Investments who allowed it, one of several steps the deal had to go through. The Hill newspaper reports that before the deal was completed, the FBI had information that Russian officials had used bribery and extortion to increase Russia's nuclear interests here. At the same time, the Clinton Foundation had received millions in donations from investors in Uranium One. President Trump says he's looking forward to hearing about testimony from a confidential FBI informant in the case, but Democrats argue he improperly pushed the Justice Department to lift a gag order on the informant to do it, with the purpose of distracting from his own Russia troubles. Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, released this statement, quote, "The prospect that the president sought to intervene will now need to be a key part of that investigation to determine if improper political leverage was applied to target his political foe." Now, here's the White House.
The president has pushed for transparency, if that's what you're referring to when dealing with Congress. I know that's probably something new for a president to actually push for transparency, but that's what he's done.
The 2 Republican-led committees investigating the Uranium One deal are the House Oversight and Intelligence Committees. Molly?
All right, just hours before reports revealed a grand jury approved charges in special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders weighed in on the probe, saying the president hopes that he can soon move on.
The president wants to see this completed. We think that we are continuing to see day in, day out as this investigation moves to completion, that as the same as it started, there's still no evidence of collusion between the president and anyone. If any collusion took place, it would be between the DNC and the Clintons. And I think we're starting to now see that all of the things that the Democrats had accused this president of doing, they were actually guilty of themselves. And I think that's a really big problem that should be certainly looked at.
Joining me now is Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters and the former president of the White House Correspondent Association. Thank you for joining me here tonight.
Pleasure.
I guess the obvious question would be potentially, what are the ramifications at the White House or for this White House?
Well, so if these charges have been filed and if somebody is arrested as early as Monday, we'll find out who that is, number one, and if that person was somebody who was connected to or part of President Trump's campaign, then it will put all the focus back on President Trump and Republicans. So this is coming also at a time when the White House is trying to divert some attention about this story to the Democrats, as you can see with the clip that you just played, and also preparing for some major policy things that they're trying to get passed. Number one, tax reform. The president is also expected to name his choice for Fed chair this week, or next week rather, and then also take off on a trip for Asia. So it would be a major story coming at a time when there's a lot of other things that they're also trying to get done.
Yeah, you mentioned the timing. It is interesting. The Uranium One story is very hot right now, where people are talking a lot about this Trump dossier. What is the mood there at the White House?
Well, I think the White House was pleased as far as that particular story is concerned to put some of the attention on the Trump dossier and the Clinton aspect to that. But otherwise, I think they're going full speed ahead on the policy issues that I was just describing. This White House is certainly very focused on tax reform, really wants to get that done, and the Fed selection has also been a big process for them. That said, it's hard to escape the Russia story, and President Trump continues to tweet about it, and people within the White House are certainly studying it, within the counsel's office paying attention to it, and whatever happens on Monday and who it ends up targeting will certainly be very interesting, not just to us and those of us covering it, but to the people in the White House themselves.
Yeah, and a number of people that are that had been in President Trump's inner circle during the course of the campaign, Paul Manafort, for instance, Carter Page, have made statements essentially that they've received no word that they're part of this indictment. We have a statement from Carter Page saying that he says, in terms of the charges, I can't even imagine what might even be considered now that the false evidence from the politically motivated, big money finance, dodgy dossier that started this extrajudicial disaster has instead been so thoroughly exposed as a complete sham. Now, you talked about the charges and who it is and what they might be having the biggest impact on potentially on the White House. This is a broad investigation, so if it's someone that is charged that has nothing to do specifically with Russian meddling, but instead has something to do with a business dealing, should the White House still be concerned? Could this be, in essence, the beginning of arrests that may be coming instead of completion of an investigation?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, we're really just speculating at this point because we won't find out until Monday what actually has been decided or what charges have been filed. But it's certainly clear, to answer your question, that this probe, this investigation was very wide in scope. And so if it is just starting on Monday with arrests or with charges, it's certainly possible that there will be many more. But it's just kind of impossible to say right now without being in the head of Robert Mueller and seeing the evidence that he has seen and taken to the grand jury.
As this investigation unfolds, and you've seen throughout the course of this, as you mentioned, the president tweeting about it, the White House making comments about things. What do you think? Will it be a big news day on Monday, and can we expect a quick response, regardless of who is arrested or for what this indictment says, from the White House?
Definitely, it's going to be a big news day. I mean, this is something that we've been looking for and anticipating for months. It's also important to remember the investigation into Russian meddling in the U.S. election started before a special prosecutor was appointed. So this is something that's been looked at for a long time, and the fact that there is some progress on that specifically will certainly be a big story. As to whether or not the White House will respond quickly, look, certainly if it's somebody connected to the Trump campaign and somebody that the White House would have had connection to, then they will be asked for comment for sure. And how quick that'll come is I can't really say here, but they'll definitely be preparing a response, I'm sure, as soon as they get that news.
All right, Jeff Mason, this could potentially be big, and we appreciate your insights this Saturday night. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, strong words from the Secretary of Defense about North Korea. Secretary James Mattis warning the threat of a nuclear missile attack from that rogue nation is accelerating. His comment coming at a joint press conference with his South Korean counterpart. The secretary saying diplomacy is still the preferred option, but says the U.S. is ready and able to respond to any attack from Pyongyang.
We must recognize the reality that this is a regime, a Kim regime north of the DMZ that threatens peace and stability and certainly directly against the people of the ROK. So our combined effort is to deter that sort of threat or to have military options, many different military options that would realistically reduce that threat as low as possible. And yes, we do have those options.
All right, Mattis is in Asia for a week-long trip that included a visit to the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas. President Trump will visit the region next week. It's been 5 years since Superstorm Sandy roared ashore, killing dozens of people in the U.S., causing costly damage. We will check in on the recovery efforts. Plus, a manhunt for a possible serial killer in Florida. Police say the person in this newly released video could hold vital answers as people are banding together to keep neighborhoods safe.
We hope to give them a feeling of confidence, to be honest with you, that they don't have to live in fear, that if they group together, they can come outside and enjoy their neighborhood and keep it safe.
Tampa police releasing new video that they hope will help to crack the case of 3 murders possibly committed by a serial killer. The video shows a man running from the scene of the first murder earlier this month. 2 other people were killed in that same area weeks later. Police are going door to door in that neighborhood searching for clues.
We're trying to get an idea of, if there's someone in the area that might not be in the area, might not belong in the area, we want to know about it. We think that there's somebody in the neighborhood who knows who that is, and we're just appealing to them at this point to please give us a call.
Brian Yanis joins me in studio with more. Brian, how is the neighborhood responding to this?
Look, it's a scary time for the Seminole Heights neighborhood in Tampa. That by all accounts, it's a good neighborhood, but now they're grappling with 3 murders in a 10-day stretch, all within a half a mile of one another. The killer is still at large. And by the way, it's Halloween weekend, a time where families are out and about. So all week from sundown to sunrise, a group of 20 volunteers from the Guardian Angels, an anti-crime organization, has been patrolling the neighborhood, looking and really trying to keep residents at ease who fear a potential serial killer could be on the loose. Investigators are also continuing their patrols, surveying neighbors and looking for more possible surveillance video.
I feel better knowing that they're out here. I feel better knowing that they're exhausting every lead that they have, that they are seeking as much information as they can and analyzing it to the best of their ability. Some tag information on our vehicles, some occupation stuff.
Today, a funeral held for the 3rd victim on the right of your screen, 20-year-old Anthony Naiboa. He was mildly autistic and got off at the wrong bus stop when he was gunned down on October 19th, just blocks away from where 22-year-old Benjamin Mitchell was shot and killed, waiting for a bus on October 9th. And just 2 days after that, 32-year-old Monica Hoffa was also murdered. These individuals had no connection to one another. They were alone. When they were killed, they weren't robbed, and they were all shot. That's about it.
Yeah, and we've seen the surveillance video released by police. Have they received any new leads based on that release?
So this video came out on Thursday, and on that day they got over 100 tips, but no real breakthroughs yet based on this surveillance video. The surveillance video was taken on the night of the first murder on October the 9th. It shows a man walking with a hoodie, then moments later running in the opposite direction on a street close to the scene, and at about the same time as the murder of Benjamin Mitchell. Police are zeroing in on the man's right hand. You can see he's seen flipping his cell phone. Police believe it could be a habit that could help identify this person in the video. The interim police chief says this person could be the key to solving these murders, but is not necessarily a suspect, though the chief is asking, Molly, if you're not the killer, then why doesn't this person just come forward?
Yeah, interesting to see if anyone there in that neighborhood will recognize that little quirk with the flip of the phone.
It's good to see you, Molly.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you, Brian. This weekend marks the 5th year since Superstorm Sandy slammed the U.S. eastern seaboard, devastating parts of New York, New Jersey. That system killed more than 100 people and caused an estimated $65 billion in damage, and the effects are still being felt today. Fox News senior correspondent Rick Leventhal has this report from Point Pleasant, New Jersey.
When Superstorm Sandy slammed the Jersey Shore October 29, 2012, it ravaged miles of coastline. The ocean swallowed the beach, swamping neighborhoods that typically didn't flood, leaving vehicles underwater and boats on dry land, cutting some houses right in half. Sandy's unrelenting winds and storm surge destroyed Casino Pier in Seaside Heights, dumping the Jetstar roller coaster in the Atlantic Ocean. 5 years later, the boardwalk and pier have been rebuilt with new thrill rides. But while thousands of houses have been repaired or replaced, construction continues up and down the coast, with the New Jersey Governor's Office reporting roughly 1 in 5 homeowners are still building, and some continue their struggle with insurance claims.
This is the exact footprint of the original house.
Josette and her husband Ed just moved back into their rebuilt home a month ago, 5 years after the bay filled their first floor.
I didn't think it would take 5 years to fully get back into the house, and had I known that, I probably would have left.
The couple had no flood insurance and spent $80,000 fixing up the original structure, then found out it still couldn't be insured. So they raised it and built a new higher house to code with help from a federal grant and another $250,000 out of pocket.
Every time I see a hurricane on the news, my heart goes out to those people. It's horrible. I feel so sad for them, just because they don't know what's ahead of them.
Now it's open.
But her husband, a retired firefighter turned carpenter, calls it a blessing.
I built the house. And I actually think that it's unbelievable where we're at today. I'm happy. The house is beautiful. And for me, it was an opportunity to have what we wanted.
Sandy sparked fires too, including this massive blaze in Breezy Point, New York. Ironically, a favorite retirement spot for former New York City cops and firefighters. More than 100 houses burned to the ground, and flooding damaged or destroyed hundreds more.
Best 2 months down here are September and October.
Charlie McLaughlin spent summers in Breezy Point for nearly 4 decades and was here the night Sandy roared ashore, escaping to his daughter's house nearby, watching helplessly as his neighborhood burned to the ground.
The surge of water from the ocean came up, and it went up 4 feet in about a minute, in about 2 or 3 minutes. And we must have had about 50 fire trucks coming in here. They were all the way backed up the main road all the way down. They couldn't get in because of the surge. This is the 38 caliber. No.
Oh my God.
You can, that's part of the handle. You can see the trigger mechanism here.
Charlie's 2-inch Colt off-duty revolver was the only thing he could salvage from the rubble. He rebuilt the house, in part because of his 9 kids and 27 grandchildren.
The kids come up, they had a bathing suit on at 7 in the morning, and they went to bed the same way.
The insurance industry says nearly 98% of Sandy-related claims have been paid out, but that means some are still waiting, and far too many never had coverage in the first place.
One of the big issues from Sandy was that there were a lot of people who needed flood insurance who did not have it. Even if you're seen as being in a low-risk area, that doesn't mean no risk.
That's a lesson folks here learned the hard way, that low risk does not mean no risk. And while the new homes and improvements are impressive, there is still a remarkable number of empty lots and boarded-up homes 5 years later, serving as reminders of just how devastating a storm Sandy was. In Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
Speaks to the challenge of rebuilding. Jesse Waters now with a look at what's ahead on Waters World.
Big lineup tonight: Eric Trump, Dean Cain, and Kellyanne Conway. Plus, I go looking for offensive Halloween costumes. Don't miss it.
That's Waters World at 8 p.m. Eastern, right after the Fox Report, right here on Fox News Channel. Well, the Houston Astros are taking control of the World Series.
High fly ball to right. Reddick is there, and the Astros take Game 3.
But it comes as one of their star players gets punished by Major League Baseball. Could it change the momentum of the series?